Hello and welcome to the Irish History Show on Near FM. My name is Cathal Brennan, and as always I'm joined by my co-presenters John Dorney of theirishstory.com. Today we'll be joined by Dr. Brian Hanley to discuss the killing of Senator Billy Fox in 1974 and its ramifications for the Protestant community along the border. Dr. Brian Hanley is the author of the IRA A Documentary History 1919 to 2005, the IRA 1926 to 1936, and with Scott Millar, The Lost Revolution, the official IRA and the Workers' Party. He is currently working on a history of the Northern Ireland conflict and how it affected the Republic of Ireland. You're very welcome to the show, Brian. Now, if we could first talk about the border communities, particularly the people in Monaghan, how were they affected by partition?
Well, I suppose from the point of view of the background to Billy Fox was, he was a member of the Church of Ireland and member of a community in Monaghan who were still relatively strong. Around 13% of the population of Monaghan were Anglican and Presbyterian, which was much larger than most other parts of the Republic, obviously, aside from Donegal, which had an even larger Protestant minority. So you were talking about over 6,000 people in the early 1970s who were Protestant, and one of the factors people believed in electoral politics in Monaghan was that there was a Protestant vote, in inverted commas, that there were apparently, 4,500 voters who could be important in any electoral contest. And since the 1920s, you'd actually had a Protestant association which had stood candidates for local councils, which had councillors in Monaghan, and which was obviously, by its, you can tell by the name, it was defined by being a Protestant association, which initially had been formed by ex-unionists, and by the late 1960s it still tried to support Protestant candidates in electoral contests. So in the border counties, particularly the Ulster border counties, still had a question, really, a religious question or a sectarian question, which most of the time lay under the surface and then began to re-emerge somewhat once the troubles began to break out after 1969.
If we talk a little bit more, Brian, about the electorate first of the Protestant community, is it the case that they were perceived to be distinctive because they were wealthier than the Catholic community?
Well, certainly there was a stereotype that they were wealthier, but I'm not so sure that would stand up to a serious examination along the border. I think that you definitely did have a perception that they were different. Billy Fox himself criticised Monaghan Protestants for having what he considered to be a bit of a ghetto mentality and being too not as well integrated into wider society as they could have been, and some people didn't like that criticism. But there was certainly a very visible minority of Protestants in the border counties. Again, fairly well integrated into many aspects of society. Billy Fox was secretary of the National Farmers Association in Monaghan and would have been very well known and well liked as a farmers' representative before he got elected to the Dáil. But a lot of Protestants would have been farmers. Some of them would have been fairly substantial farmers, but not all of them. You would have had a diversity in terms of class background among the various Protestant communities as well. And I think people would have, in Monaghan, for example, there were slightly more Presbyterians than Anglicans. In Donegal, there was a large Presbyterian population, and they would have been, again, quite distinctive in terms of the makeup of those communities. So I think what would have been apparent, certainly, was that they were taken notice of, and people would have noted the difference in communities. There were even some villages and some townlands where the majority would have been Protestant. You would still have had orange halls and orange lodges. You would still have had a belief among many people that a lot of Protestants were at heart unionists in politics as well. Again, that was very often based more on whispers or imagination than reality.
Was there much evidence of the sectarian card being played at election times?
Yeah, there is evidence of that, particularly when the major parties were threatened. In 1969, there's actually two Protestant candidates for election. One is Erskine Childers of Fianna Fáil, the other is Billy Fox. Fianna Fáil traditionally won 2 seats in Monaghan. It was a 3-seat constituency and Fine Gael won. But in this election, unusually, Fine Gael took 2 seats. Billy Fox took one of them. Now, during that election, there's a whispering campaign which becomes expressed openly that Fox is a member of the B Specials. There's posters go up around Monaghan, vote for Paisley, vote for Fox. If you want to join the B Specials, contact Billy Fox, etc. Fox is actually confronted verbally regularly at polling stations with the allegation that he's a member of the Special Constabulary. Now, he wasn't a member of the Special Constabulary. The only reason people might say that was because of his religion. And yet, when he's elected, he actually is confronted by this allegation in Leinster House as well. So, not just in Monaghan, but also in Donegal in the 1969 election. This is the election of June 1969. Fine Gael won a candidate called Bertie Boggs, who's also Protestant, and again graffiti appears saying "No Pope here, vote Boggs #1." There's allegations that Boggs is also B special. So the sectarian card is played. Now, Fox doesn't allege that it's played by everybody, or that even that it's played by the Fianna Fáil organisation as a whole, but there's certainly individuals who use it in an effort to really try and hold on to 2 seats in Monaghan, which they don't succeed in doing. And again, the irony, of course, is that the one seat that Fianna Fáil do hold is that of Erskine Childers, who's a Protestant himself. But that's in the summer of 1969. By the autumn of 1969, once the troubles have broken out in the north, then that question actually does become even a bit sharper, because in August and September 1969 there are widespread rumours that Protestants living in Cavan, Monaghan, even Sligo and Donegal are crossing the border and donning B special uniforms, and this rumour spreads like wildfire. And again, people like Billy Fox have to confront this rumour. There are allegations at public meetings that there are B specials living south of the border who are going across to take part in the suppression of the Battle of the Bogside, for example. There's petrol bomb attacks on homes of people who are suspected to be specials. There's threatening letters sent to them in Donegal and other places. And then this passes, but again it's apparent that even though this sectarian question had obviously wasn't the main factor in people's lives, and in some senses was underground, when the crisis in the north blew up, it re-emerges as a question. And that allegation that Fox was to be special is actually voiced in Dáil by none other than Brian Hanley and Kevin Boland. I mean, Brian Hanley of Fianna Fáil refers to Fox as a B special Republican in one Dáil debate, and Fox is highly offended by this. And Kevin Boland also refers to him as a B special and is forced to apologise for it.
Just to contextualise, this term B special as a term of abuse, why did this have such resonance in border areas even before the 1969 troubles broke out?
Well, I think obviously the B specials or the Special Constabulary are seen as viscerally seen as the sharp end of Unionist oppression, even more so than the Royal Ulster Constabulary, because they're a force that are raised in times of troubles. They're composed obviously exclusively of Protestants. They're the force that are always seen as having been in the 20s involved in the most brutal suppression of nationalists in border areas, and therefore the memory of the B specials, and then also they're remobilised in the 50s during the border campaign. Many people who lived in border areas would have done business in the north. Obviously they would have travelled across to the north fairly regularly. So during times of trouble you would face B special checkpoints, or you would come across B special, and there would also be awareness that many northern Protestants were members of the Special Constabulary. So people would be aware. There would be farmers, for example, in Fermanagh, or farmers in Armagh, who were also members of the Special Constabulary. So they're very much the very public face of the Unionist government. And certainly in 1969, as nationalists begin to protest and as trouble breaks out, the B specialists, the fear of the B specialists, even though they're not actually used in Dáil, for example, the fact that they're brought in during the Battle of the Bogside, one of the factors in creating such a wave of sympathy and worry in the south is the belief that the Bogsiders are going to be massacred by the B specialists unless there's intervention. So this idea of the specialists is obviously a very powerful one, and then it's also one that can be used as a stick to beat opponents as well, if you can suggest that they're some way connected with that force.
In fact, the actual Billy Fox, as opposed to, say, the election opponent, did not have Unionist views. Can you tell us a bit more about Billy Fox's background and his views?
Yeah, well, Fox was a farmer from an area called Bourne in County Monaghan, and I mean, one of the things that's mentioned about him in the context of the 1969 election is that he's a glamour candidate for Fine Gael, because he'd been secretary of the National Farmers Association, but he's young. He's only 30 during that election. It's widely remarked on the fact that he's single and seems to have, fairly active social life. This comes up in the commentary. It's one of the reasons why Fianna Fáil apparently are worried about him, because they do think he can, get votes from a wider, not just obviously from Protestants, but from a wider section of Monaghan society. And Fox himself seems to have been interested One, in the liberal ethos of some of Fine Gael in the 60s, the idea of a just society. He believes in, he thinks religious distinction should play no role in politics by the 1960s. He's very determined, for example, he wants to, speak as much outside Catholic masses on a Sunday as he does among potential Protestant voters. And he's also, as it becomes apparent once the Troubles breaks out, he would have been on the more nationalist wing of Fine Gael. So, for example, in August 1969, Fox and his fellow Monaghan Fine Gael MP John Conlon travelled to the Barkside and then to the Falls Road in the aftermath of the fighting there. Now, one result of that is that within the Protestant community in Monaghan there are some people who are annoyed by this, and Fox has actually given the nickname Barkside Billy, allegedly, because some Protestants are annoyed that he takes such an overtly nationalist stance. By 1970, 1971, it's also apparent that Fox is very critical of the policies of the Unionist parties in the North. He's very critical of Ian Paisley. For example, he doesn't welcome Paisley when Paisley begins to establish a small free Presbyterian community in Monaghan. He thinks it's going to stir up trouble. By 1971, when the British Army begin to crater roads along the border and begin to cut off roads which would have been widely used by local communities, the British Army claimed they need to close these roads for security reasons. Fox is vociferously critical of the British Army. He takes part in a number of protests against road cratering. On one occasion, he sees people being hit by rubber bullets and CS gas canisters fired by the British Army. A Garda, for example, is injured by a CS gas canister, and Fox brings 2 rubber bullets and a CS gas canister into the Dáil and raises the question of why the Fianna Fáil government, the so-called Republican government, are not doing more to protect border communities from British Army incursions. It's actually during one of these debates that he obviously gets under the skin of some Fianna Fáil TDs, because they begin to raise this argument about why is Billy Fox so vociferous about this question. Dáil O'Malley, for example, makes a fairly snide reference to Billy Fox's striking conversion, which can be read in a number of ways. So, but Fox is, certainly in terms of Fine Gael, I remember Fine Gael are in opposition at this point, but he is highly critical of British government policy along the border. He's critical of the Unionist parties in the North, and he does, people note that he puts himself in physical danger on a number of occasions during road cratering protests to try and defend some of his constituents.
Now, Fox's stance regarding the rubber bullets and criticising the Unionist administration, would that have been popular within Fine Gael or within the leadership of Fine Gael at the time?
Well, it's an interesting point, because Fine Gael are in opposition, Fianna Fáil are in government, and Fianna Fáil are in quite a difficult position in this period, because they're actually threatened by their Republican flank and heavily criticised for not doing enough about the question of partition and about the question of the North. Fine Gael have a little bit more freedom. I mean, traditionally they're obviously seen as the less nationalist in those terms than Fianna Fáil, but they're led by a man who's quite a traditional nationalist in many ways, Liam Cosgrave, who in 1969 says that no Irish person can welcome the arrival of the British Army, who continually says that the aim of Fine Gael is a united Ireland, and ultimately that will be the only way that we will have peace in Ireland. So obviously very much against IRA activity in the south, but at this point that's not the key issue for them. So there would have been people in Fine Gael. In 1971 Fine Gael Irish, you have a lot of speakers talking about the 6 counties, for example. It's noted that there's people in Fine Gael who won't use the term Northern Ireland, who criticise Jack Lynch for not being tough enough with the British. So there is within Fine Gael a nationalist element, and in fact mightn't have been naturally part of that, but I think it's also part of where he comes from. This issue of road cratering becomes a major issue in the border counties. British troops are making incursions into the territory of the Republic, and there is occasions, for example, when Gardaí are injured by CS gas, during conflicts between locals and the British Army. So Fox does raise this question, I think, very genuinely, and he does take it very seriously. But he's regarded, I mean, certainly after his death, there were a lot of compliments paid to him by various constituents as a TD who just took his job very seriously and was prepared to work on behalf of any supporters of any political party or from any background.
For various reasons, though, didn't Billy Fox lose his seat in the early 70s?
Yeah, he lost his seat in the 1973 general election, which again returns a Fine Gael Labour government. He lost his seat ultimately by about 230 votes, so he lost narrowly. it was widely believed that he'd lost a significant element of his Protestant voting base because of his outspokenness on these issues. It's difficult to actually judge that entirely, but there does seem to have been, so again, one of the ironies is that Jack Lynch's policy seems to some Protestant voters to be more realistic and moderate, and there seems to be a transfer of votes across to Fianna Fáil in that election, and Fox loses enough support just to lose him his seat. But certainly it does seem to have made him unpopular amongst some Protestant voters. At the same time, it doesn't seem to have won a huge amount of support from other voters either. But it's difficult. But it's difficult to tell exactly why he lost his seat. But he does lose it, and it's in the period after that then that he becomes a senator.
Many senators don't do an awful lot, but what did he do as a senator?
Well, he's not very active in the period that he's in the Senate. He's doesn't make as many waves certainly as he has done in the Dáil. He's much quieter. But what the political observers believed was that the constituency was being reshaped to become Cavan Monaghan. It was going to become a 5-seat constituency, and there was a very good chance that in another general election Fox would probably be returned because he had enough core support to get elected in a 5-seater. So he's probably biding his time and hoping to make a comeback within the political system. He's not doing anything too dramatic politically by that point.
In the border area, you've already talked about the British Army cratering roads to try to stop movement across the border. Was the IRA active in Monaghan? Were community relations being strained by the Troubles?
Well, there's a number of things. One is that by 1973 you have increasing loyalist activity in border areas. In December 1972 you have caravans in Cavan, which killed 2 teenagers in Belturbet, caravans in Donegal, and caravans in Monaghan. You have a number of attacks during 1973. In one case in Monaghan, a Republican who was on the run from Northern Ireland is shot and wounded, although he manages to escape, but the house where he's staying is burnt down by what's believed to be a loyalist group operating from across the border. And you have increasing paranoia then about loyalist activity in the border area, along with the fairly obvious evidence of IRA activity in border areas as well. I mean, because you have attacks which unionists always claim are launched from across the border, but certainly there are a large number of IRA activists, provisional IRA activists, who sometimes come from Armagh or elsewhere, but who are now living in Monaghan or Cavan or Donegal, who do take part in attacks across the border areas as well. So the Irish Army by this stage are permanently based in border areas to back up the Gardaí. The border itself has become even more apparent. Obviously large parts of it have been closed off, and you have a constant and very large British military presence. You would see British helicopters, for example, from Monaghan and Cavan and Donegal. So the troubles are an everyday reality, and because particularly of loyalist attacks, you again have rumours that local Protestants are in some way involved with loyalist paramilitaries and are aiding those paramilitaries when they carry out attacks in Monaghan and Cavan and Donegal.
Were there any sectarian attacks on Orange Halls or churches or Protestant property in Cavan and Monaghan in that period?
Yeah, well, you do have in 1969 there are some, and then again after the introduction of internment in August 1971 you have a number of fairly minor attacks on property and vandalism, and then after Bloody Sunday again you have as part of the wave of protest across the Republic, you also have a number of attacks on Protestant property or threats made against Protestants, and there are claims in Monaghan. Again, it becomes quite bitter at meetings of the Urban District Council and the County Council. People allege that during the National Day of Mourning, for example, that Protestants in Monaghan were warned not to leave their homes and that they were held prisoner, and other people dispute this and say that this wasn't the case at all. But there are, threats made, and there are veiled threats. So there's the fact that, that you do have a sizable minority religious group who are associated in some ways with politics across the border does mean that it's a little more visceral than it would be in other parts of Ireland. Now again, that mood passes, and many people, would say that these things are, in the great scheme of things, relatively minor. But they do occur, and they do lend weight to this atmosphere of whispers and of worries about, what side are really people are really on, and who's involved with who, for example, which is really the context for what happens to Billy Fox in the end.
Is it possible to gauge how much sympathy there was among the Protestant population in Monaghan for the Stormont regime, or the RUC, or the B Specials?
It's difficult to gauge because the majority of Protestants in the border counties, saw themselves as citizens of the Irish Republic, whatever their other political views. Now, some of them would have been members of the Orange Order, for example, which obviously has very direct links with the Orange Order in the rest of Ulster. It's very difficult to tell, really. I mean, there is some evidence in terms of Garda intelligence of some involvement of Monaghan-based Protestants with loyalist paramilitaries. In 1975, there's a bomb. 1976, actually, there's a bomb attack in Cathal in which a person is killed. And in the aftermath of that, the Gardaí questioned a number of local Protestants, and they also, according to Garda intelligence files, believe that there are people involved in surveillance on behalf of loyalist paramilitaries based in Armagh, in the border counties. But in general terms, there's a wider suspicion, and there's constant rumours about involvement, a lot of which are compiled in the kind of a book called Monaghan County of Intrigue, which was published in 1979, which at least does it performs a service in terms of putting down all these rumours. Most of them are fantasy, and a lot of them are very sectarian fantasies, but they do hint at the kind of belief that people have, which again is that there's a widespread loyalist network among Protestants in Cavan and Monaghan, and that they have access to arms, and that they're training, and that the state ignores this. These kind of rumours are in circulation in the early 70s. So the vast majority of them are hugely exaggerated, but there is some evidence, which has only become apparent because of the investigation into the Dublin Monaghan bombings, that the Gardaí did believe that there were some loyalist sympathisers living south of the border.
So we have a situation along the border in Monaghan in particular where there's a conflict going on just over the border and across the border on occasion, where there's loyalist activity, and there's certainly paranoia about the sympathies of the Protestant population of Monaghan. But it seems a long way from that to the killing of a nationalist politician who happened to be a Protestant. How did the killing of Billy Fox come about?
Well, it really came about because, again, of these rumours about Protestant involvement with loyalist paramilitaries. As I said, in November 1973, there'd been an attack on a member of the Provisional IRA who'd been wounded in Monaghan. In the aftermath of that, the Provisional IRA are informed that locals had been involved in this attack, and they believe that to be the case. Somebody tells the Provisional IRA that a family called the Callissons, who live near Clonus, are allowing their home to be used as an arms dump for the Ulster Volunteer Force. Now, at the time, Marjorie Coulson, who's a daughter of this family, was a nurse in Belfast, but she was going out with Billy Fox, and the Provisional IRA make a decision to raid this home, which they do on the 11th of March 1974. They raid the house, they interrogate the people who are living there, terrorise them. At some point during the raid, they throw a copy of the family's Bible into the fire. They demand to know where the arms are being held. They demand to know, what connection the family have with loyalists. And in the midst of this raid, Billy Fox arrives by car. He usually visited on a Monday night to see Marjorie Coulson because she came back from Belfast on that day. Provisional IRA people who are on guard outside challenge Fox. He seems to have panicked and he runs, and they open fire and kill him. Then they burn the house and they burn the family's mobile home and leave the scene. And news breaks the next day that a senator has been shot dead in County Monaghan. It becomes apparent, obviously, that it's Billy Fox. And there are again all rumours immediately and denials, because the Provisional IRA adamantly deny that they're involved at all. They suggest that it's possibly British dirty tricks or loyalists who were involved in the killing of Billy Fox, because again they mentioned the fact that Billy Fox had been prominent in protests about British Army incursions, and it's only really because of the arrest of a number of the men within the next few weeks that it becomes apparent that it was the Provisional IRA who killed Fox. They claim that they essentially were taken by surprise and they panicked and that there was no plan to kill Fox. So I think certainly the evidence seems to suggest that he wasn't targeted for assassination and that the men involved were surprised by his appearance at the house. That doesn't excuse his death in any way, but I don't think it's necessarily the case that they set out to kill a local Protestant politician, but they did set out to raid the home of a Protestant family who it seems were maliciously fingered by somebody who didn't like them. And again, this is the context of the time. If people do believe in these, you know, that there are secret paramilitary networks in the area, it's quite easy to set up people you don't like and to say, well, there's something about that family that's not quite right, you should check them out. And that's the reason why the Provisionals had raided that home and very brutally, you know, questioned and threatened the people in the home as well about their alleged links with loyalists.
But it's also an attempt to pin this on the official IRA at the time, wasn't there?
Well, there's in Tim Pat Coogan's history of the IRA, he, you know, simply states in passing that the official IRA killed Senator Billy Fox, and there was never an allegation that the officials were involved in it. I suppose the best thing you can say is that it's very sloppy writing. The worst that it's disingenuous, but there's no basis to that at all, and there's no basis to the fact that the loyalists or the British were involved either. I mean, it was the Provisional IRA killed Billy Fox, and 5 members of the Provisional IRA eventually went to jail for his death. And during their testimony, when they again talked about the fact that, as far as they were concerned, this all went back to the raid in November 1973, in which loyalists had shot a member of the Provisional IRA, and that this is what sparked off the whole process.
Was there ever any apology from the Provisional IRA?
No, I mean, when he was killed initially, a number of leading people in Sinn Féin mentioned the fact that they knew Fox and that he had been, you know, active in various protests, and this, they said, was again reason why it couldn't have been Republicans who killed him. But no, what happened, I mean, publicly it simply played down. Privately, there were whispers and attempts to justify it, and again the allegation that Fox was in some way involved with loyalists would have been thrown around in the years afterwards, even though anyone who would have known the politics at the time would have known that that simply wasn't true. Again, in terms of local politics, a few months later, in May, you have the bombings of Dublin and Monaghan. There's local rumours which survive to this day that the Monaghan bombing was revenged by loyalists for Billy Fox, and that in fact again local Protestants were involved in it. I don't think there's any evidence for that at all, but it again shows you how rumours can survive and can indeed flourish once you've had tragedies like that of Billy Fox's death.
It seems from trailing around the internet, where of course you'll find evidence of everything, that there seems to be a bit of a shame among Republican supporters about the Billy Fox killing and various attempts to distance themselves from it. One of the theories people like to hold is that it was the SAS who did it, things like that. What do you make of these kind of theories?
Well, I don't think, you know, the SAS didn't do it, and I think it does. I think there should be shame about it, because by every account, Billy Fox was a fairly decent local politician who hadn't really, you know, who'd worked hard in conventional political terms for people in Monaghan, and who certainly didn't deserve to be gunned down on the basis of a spurious rumour, which was put about by people who wanted to hurt the family he was involved with because he was going out with their daughter. So I think, you know, when people are ashamed of things like that, they will grasp at straws, and I think that's probably what they're doing. But it's also the case, I think, that the longer that we become removed from that era, the harder it is to understand the fear and the paranoia that existed on all sides along the border, and how that, you know, in everyday life affected how people made political decisions and made social decisions and the paths that they took. And I think extent explain the paranoia of that Fine Gael Labour coalition, because even though they were already on a collision course with Republicans, and they had been from the minute they'd taken office, certainly within Fine Gael, what the killing of Billy Fox does is that it reinforces this view that Fine Gael are the only block on the road between anarchy and the end of the state, essentially. That once again Fine Gael politicians are being assassinated, for their beliefs. Certainly within Fine Gael itself, the killing of Fox it raises the ghosts of things like the assassination of Kevin O'Higgins. The circumstances are quite different, and the politics are quite different as well. But certainly for that coalition government, they see this as evidence of the fact that, who could be next. I mean, they do believe that this could be the beginning of a policy on behalf of Republicans to target people who are in government or supportive of the government. So again, it adds to official paranoia as well, and it certainly feeds into what becomes very repressive measures taken by that government in order to try and stop what they saw as the Republican threat.
Was there a feeling among Protestant civilians that there might be widespread sectarian attacks against ordinary Protestants living along the border?
Yeah, I think there certainly was at various stages, and it's sometimes expressed in worries at council meetings, and at debates over particular issues. But in general terms, I mean, there's a huge degree of outrage and sympathy expressed after Fox's death, and it's quite clear that most people don't approve of any attack based on people's religion, and even people who may have had certain sectarian beliefs and fears certainly don't seem to think that people should be killed over them. So you have quite, it's quite a contradictory situation, because while they're very, very close to the violence of the northern conflict, and it does impact on border areas very directly many times, at the same time they're also removed from it. I mean, it never does become a conflict that becomes, as anything like as intense as it is just a few miles north across the border. But it does add to this feeling of paranoia and fear, and among some people the belief that Protestants will be targeted if things get worse. It's the only killing of a member of the Dáil Seanad during the Northern Ireland conflict. But at the time, people think that it could be the start of a wider attack on the political establishment, although that turns out not to have been the case.
Bearing that in mind, how did that impact on the crackdown on militant Republicans south of the border?
Well, I think the Fine Gael Labour government coalition were on a collision course with Republicans anyway, and they already included within them people like Conor Cruiser Bryan, Paddy Donegan, and others who viscerally despised the provisional IRA and who were determined to try and smash the organisation south of the border. But certainly what this did was that it makes it quite difficult to argue, for a Liberal position, if you have anybody who's going to argue for one, when, your party can turn around and say, well, what are you going to say about the fact that, a member of our party, and also then it would always be said a member of a minority faith, has been gunned down by this organisation. Why should we give them any concessions? And certainly there's hunger strikes, for example, at Portlaoise, 1975 and 1977. During 1977, the coalition government, made clear in their press statements that one of the people who's taking part in the hunger strike is one of the men who was jailed for the killing of Billy Fox. So again, they are essentially saying, why should we give concessions to these people? These are people who are just as opposed to the government down here as they are to the British, and in fact, they intend to overthrow us as well, which is what that government would have always claimed. So therefore we need strict security measures. Certainly in terms of Fine Gael history, they would again look back to the idea that they were, as Cosgrave mentioned more than once, the party that had saved the state, as they saw it, during the Civil War, and were faced with the choice of saving the need to save the state again in the 1970s. And a lot of that is rhetoric, and a lot of it is self-serving, but I don't think you can get away from all actions have, produced reactions, and certainly the killing of a member of the government party in the circumstances in which Billy Fox was killed is going to produce paranoia and bitterness and a desire to clamp down on the people who were involved in killing him.
Would it be true to say that Billy Fox has been forgotten in a way that Kevin O'Higgins has not? That we remember Kevin O'Higgins but we tend to forget Billy Fox?
Well, I think it's true to say that Billy Fox has been forgotten in a way that Kevin O'Higgins has not. That we remember Kevin O'Higgins but we tend to forget Billy Fox.
Well, I think actually he's not historically as significant a figure as Kevin O'Higgins, who was a government minister and who was also a government minister who, during the Civil War, was seen as the staunchest defender of the policy of the executions, for example, and also, very much personally associated with repression in the Civil War era. Billy Fox wasn't, if Billy Fox hadn't been killed, he would have been probably, a relatively little-known Fine Gael Monaghan politician who'd had a couple of moments where he'd been in the national spotlight, partially because of criticism of him from Fianna Fáil, and also because he criticised the government on a number of issues, but he wouldn't have been that famous. And I think it's also the case that O'Higgins is targeted for assassination. Whatever the circumstances, the men who kill him know that they're killing Kevin O'Higgins. The circumstances of the killing of Billy Fox are much more unclear. It's not really clear whether the men knew him or not when he arrived, and whether it was simply produced by panic or because he, made a decision to try and run for it when he saw armed men at the house. So the circumstances are more unclear. Certainly, I think he is remembered in Monaghan, and there will be, I think, quite a bit written about his death in the next month because it's the 40th anniversary. But aside from the tragic circumstances of his death, I don't think he'd be that prominent nationally a figure without what occurred.
Can you talk about the effect that the actions of that night had on the Callison family and on Billy Fox's fiancée in particular?
Well, Marjorie Coulson suffered from ill health and died quite young, and I think her family have always blamed the circumstances of Billy Fox's death for causing that. And even though the family continued to live in the area, I think they felt that rumours, still were prevalent among some people as to why their house was chosen for the raid and what the exact circumstances of it were. So, I think it did have a major effect on them, and even the idea that somebody had a grudge against them and had led to them being targeted would obviously have a bad effect on your attitude towards your neighbours or the people who knew you. So I think it obviously had a big effect on that family. And again, that's replicated across thousands of families in Northern Ireland itself, of course, which is one of the other reasons why sometimes when people talk about the impact of the conflict, but it's all a long time ago, they forget that actually for individual families, the tragedy that stays with the most is the one that affected them, not the general tragedy of the war or the conflict. It's what happens to you is the thing that you always remember. And there are thousands of people, in border areas and in Northern Ireland more generally, who have some tragic memory which keeps the conflict alive in a way that it doesn't, perhaps, for a lot of people in other parts of Ireland.
Thank you very much, Brian. That was Dr. Brian Hanley talking about the killing of Fine Gael Senator Billy Fox in 1973. If you'd like to listen to this or previous episodes of the Irish History Show, check out the podcast page on near.ie or go to our Facebook page on facebook.com/The Irish History Show. You can also email us on history@near.ie. On behalf of myself, Cathal Brennan, and my co-presenter John Dorney, thank you very much for listening to the show.